Operation Gunnerside, the mission that stopped Hitler's atomic dream. February 16, 1943, Hardangervidda Plateau, Norway. Second Lieutenant Joachim Runeberg watched his parachute deploy against a star-filled sky, then disappear into darkness as storm clouds swallowed the moonlight. Below him lay 1,000 square kilometers of frozen wilderness, Nazi-occupied territory, and a mission that British intelligence called impossible. He was 23 years old. He commanded 5 men dropping through sub-zero air toward a power plant that produced the only substance Hitler's scientists needed to build an atomic bomb. The previous team sent to destroy this facility, 41 British commandos, had died screaming in crashed gliders or been executed one by one in frozen Norwegian woods. Runeberg carried suicide pills in his pocket and explosives in his pack. What he didn't know was that the substance his team would destroy in 11 days, 500 kilograms of heavy water, represented Germany's entire hope of achieving nuclear fission before the Allies. The plant they would infiltrate was considered impregnable. The route they would take was thought impossible. The mission British Special Operations Executive would later call the most successful sabotage operation of World War II was about to begin. The stakes that winter night exceeded anything visible in those parachutes floating toward Norwegian mountains. Germany's nuclear program, led by Werner Heisenberg and Kurt Diebner, had been advancing steadily since 1939. Heisenberg's team had calculated that a uranium reactor moderated by heavy water could produce plutonium for atomic weapons. German physicists understood fission's military potential better than most Allied leaders did. The physics was elegant and terrifying. When uranium-235 absorbs a neutron, the nucleus splits into lighter elements. This fission releases energy and additional neutrons. Those neutrons can trigger more fissions in nearby uranium atoms. The result is a chain reaction. Uncontrolled, this creates an explosion measured in kilotons. Controlled, it produces sustained energy for power generation or plutonium breeding. Either application required moderating the neutrons to optimal speeds. Heavy water, deuterium oxide, was the key. Unlike ordinary water, heavy water doesn't absorb neutrons during nuclear reactions. This property makes it ideal for moderating nuclear chain reactions in uranium reactors. Without heavy water or graphite, achieving controlled fission was nearly impossible with 1940s technology. Heavy water looks identical to regular water. It tastes slightly different. Reports say sweeter. But chemically it's distinct. Each hydrogen atom in the molecule has an extra neutron in its nucleus. This makes heavy water about 11% denser than regular water. It freezes at 3.82 degrees Celsius instead of 0. It boils at 101.4 degrees Celsius instead of 100. These subtle differences make it perfect for nuclear applications, but difficult to produce. Natural water contains only 0.0156% heavy water. Concentrating it requires processing enormous quantities through electrolysis. The Vemork plant in Norway was uniquely suited for this. Its massive hydroelectric capacity provided cheap power for electrolysis on industrial scales. Germany controlled only one facility capable of producing heavy water in significant quantities. The Vemork hydroelectric plant in Telemark, Norway, produced 1.2 tons annually as a byproduct of fertilizer production. Before German invasion in April 1940, French intelligence had removed 185 kilograms in a daring operation. But the plant remained operational under German control. The facility was extraordinary. Built in 1934, Vemork was once the world's largest hydroelectric power station. It generated 145,000 kilowatts from water cascading down 300 meters of elevation. Norsk Hydro used this power to produce ammonia for fertilizer through the Haber-Bosch process. heavy water was a profitable byproduct. The electrolysis cells used in ammonia production gradually concentrated deuterium. By repeatedly processing water through multiple stages, Vemork could produce weapons-grade heavy water. By 1942, it was the only facility in the world doing so at industrial scale. British intelligence learned in spring 1942 that Germany had ordered production quintupled. Reports indicated German scientists were requesting 5,000 kilograms annually. This acceleration meant only one thing. Hitler's scientists were approaching reactor capability. The race for atomic weapons had begun. But most people, including the commandos who would risk their lives, didn't understand what they were racing toward. Nuclear fission was barely understood outside physics departments. The concept of atomic bombs seemed like science fiction. Yet the scientists knew. In December 1938, Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann had split uranium atoms. Lisa Meitner and Otto Frisch correctly interpreted the results. News spread through the physics community like wildfire. Leo Szilard immediately understood the military implications. He convinced Albert Einstein to warn President Roosevelt. That warning led to the Manhattan Project. The Allies understood they were in a race against time. Winston Churchill grasped the implications viscerally. A German atomic bomb would make Britain's island fortress vulnerable to annihilation. Conventional warfare became irrelevant if Germany achieved nuclear capability first. The Vemork plant had to be destroyed. Churchill had created the Special Operations Executive in July 1940 specifically for missions like this. Set Europe ablaze, he'd ordered. SOE specialized in sabotage, subversion, and supporting resistance movements. Now they faced their most critical mission. But Vemork was no ordinary target. The plant perched on a cliff 600 feet above the Mona River in southern Norway's Telemark region. Steep gorges surrounded the facility on three sides. The fourth side rose sharply into mountains. A single suspension bridge provided the only practical access route. The bridge was guarded, illuminated, and constantly patrolled. Approach roads were mined. The facility itself was a fortress. German security was formidable. Landmines covered approach routes from above. Searchlights swept the perimeter every few minutes. Guards patrolled with dogs. The facility was considered one of the most secure installations in occupied Europe. Machine gun positions covered all approaches. Barbed wire surrounded the perimeter. The cliff below provided natural protection. German commanders believed Vemork was impregnable. Bombing was considered and rejected. RAF night bombing lacked precision to hit such a small, isolated target. The plant was built into the cliff face, making it difficult to destroy from the air. Daytime bombing would alert Germans and allow them to move heavy water stocks before destruction was complete. Civilian casualties in nearby Ryukan town were unacceptable. 5,000 Norwegians lived there, many working at the plant. An errant bomb could kill hundreds. The political cost would be catastrophic. The mission required boots on the ground. Commandos who could infiltrate undetected. Sappers who could destroy production equipment without triggering alarms. Soldiers prepared to die, completing their objective. But the first attempt had ended in catastrophe that still haunted British Special Operations Executive Headquarters in London. October 1942, SOE began planning the Vemork operation in earnest. The first phase required reconnaissance. 4 Norwegian commandos, Operation Grouse, would parachute onto Hardangervidda Plateau to gather intelligence and prepare a landing zone. Jens Anton Poulsen, age 28, led the team. Knut Haugland, 23, served as radio operator. Klaus Hellberg, 23, provided wilderness expertise. Arne Kjelstrup, 23, completed the quartet. All were experienced outdoorsmen. They knew Hardangervidda's brutal conditions. They understood winter survival in mountains. They were prepared to live off the land indefinitely. October 18, 1942, they parachuted into Norway. Landing was rough, rocky terrain, scattered equipment. But within hours, they'd recovered everything and established a base camp. They began radioing intelligence back to England. Their reports were detailed and alarming. German security at Vemork had increased substantially. More guards, more patrols, more minefields. The suspension bridge was heavily defended, but they identified potential weaknesses. Guard changes followed predictable schedules. Security focused on obvious approaches. The gorge below remained undefended. Germans thought it impassable. For 6 weeks, Operation Grouse observed and reported. They moved camp regularly to avoid detection. They ate reindeer meat when hunting was successful. They rationed British supplies carefully. Then came the order. Operation Freshman was launching. 34 British Royal Engineers were coming. Grouse was to guide them to Vemork for the assault. November 19, 1942. Operation Freshman launched from RAF Skitten in Scotland. 2 Handley Page Halifax bombers, each towing an airspeed Horsa glider. Each glider carried 2 pilots and 15 Royal Engineers from 9th Field Company, 1st Airborne Division. The engineers were volunteers. They'd trained for months without knowing their target. Lieutenant Alexander Allen, 24, commanded the assault force. His men were eager, capable, and utterly unprepared for what awaited. The plan called for glider-borne assault on frozen Lake Musvatten. Operation Grouse would guide them from landing zone to target. The engineers would overwhelm security through surprise and numbers. They'd destroy the heavy water production facility and escape to Sweden. The weather was marginal at departure. Forecasts predicted deterioration, but the mission had been postponed twice already. High Command ordered execution. The flight across the North Sea was uneventful. Both combinations reached Norwegian airspace successfully. Then conditions deteriorated rapidly. Visibility dropped to near zero. Halifax A's crew searched for the landing zone. Radio beacons from Operation Grouse weren't functioning properly. Navigation became guesswork in clouds and darkness. Ice accumulated on aircraft and tow rope. The tow rope's weight increased as ice built up. The Halifax lost altitude trying to maintain speed. The combination descended through 1,000 feet, seeking clear air. At 11:50 p.m., the tow rope snapped. The glider pilot, Sergeant Peter Doig, was Australian. His co-pilot was Pilot Officer James Fraser, also Australian. They fought to control the suddenly free glider, but they were too low in clouds over mountains. The glider crash-landed in steep terrain near Filjesdal. The impact was catastrophic. 8 men died instantly, including both pilots. 4 were severely wounded. 5 men survived uninjured. They tried treating the wounded, but injuries were beyond field medicine. Driver Ernest Pendlebury died within hours despite his comrades' efforts. The survivors built a fire, hoping to signal rescuers. Instead, they alerted German troops. A Wehrmacht patrol found them November 20th. The wounded were loaded onto sledges for transport. What happened next violated every convention of war. Gestapo officers took custody of the prisoners. The 3 remaining wounded men were interrogated brutally. Then they were murdered, exact method unknown. Their bodies were weighted with rocks and dumped in the ocean off Stavanger. This was meant to hide evidence of execution. Instead, it ensured no marked graves exist for these 3 men. Their names are commemorated on memorials, but their bodies were never recovered. The 5 uninjured survivors fared little better. They were imprisoned at Greenie concentration camp near Oslo. For 2 months, They endured interrogation and harsh conditions. They hoped for prisoner exchange or repatriation. January 18, 1943, Gestapo officers came for them. The 5 men were told they were being transferred. Instead, they were driven to woods near Trandum. There, they were executed by firing squad, one by one. Their bodies were buried in unmarked graves. After the war, Norwegian authorities recovered the remains. They now rest in Oslo Western Civil Cemetery. Their sacrifice is honored, but they never saw their mission succeed. Halifax B's fate was even worse. The bomber's crew searched for the landing zone. Unable to find it, they descended seeking visual reference. In clouds and darkness, they flew directly into Hestad Mountain. The impact killed all 7 crew instantly. Flight Lieutenant Mark Strathdy led the crew. Pilot Officer Norman Davies and Pilot Officer Malcolm Vaughan Fowler were Australian. 4 RAF crew members completed the complement. Their Halifax disintegrated on impact. Wreckage scattered across the mountainside. Local Norwegians discovered the crash site. They buried the crew in shallow graves, later reinterred at Helleland Churchyard. The glider Halifax B had been towing was released before the crash. Pilots Sergeant David Methven and Sergeant Norman Brown, both Australian, fought for control. The glider spiraled down through clouds. It smashed into Benkia Mountain near Helleland. 3 men died in the crash, both pilots and sapper William Patterson. 14 survivors emerged from the wreckage. Some were injured, but all were mobile. They had landed kilometers from any recognizable landmark. 2 men walked to Helleland seeking help. They contacted a local Norwegian, Trond Hovland. Hovland wanted to help, but knew German authorities controlled communications. Calling a doctor meant alerting the Germans. He made the call anyway. German troops arrived within hours. The 14 British soldiers surrendered. Wehrmacht officers took them to Sletterbo camp near Egersund. The Wehrmacht wanted to treat them as prisoners of war. Geneva Convention required this, but Hitler's commando order of October 18, 1942, superseded international law. All commandos were to be executed immediately upon capture. That same day, November 20th, the execution was carried out. The 14 men were led one by one into woods near the camp. Each heard the man before him executed. Each knew his turn was coming. Lieutenant Alexander Allen died first. He had commanded with distinction. His men respected him. He died trying to protect them. Sapper Gerald Williams was the youngest. He had turned 18 just weeks before. He'd lied about his age to enlist. He died in a Norwegian forest, far from his Yorkshire home. All 14 were buried in unmarked graves in sand dunes at Brusand. A Norwegian civilian, Torger Birkeland, secretly witnessed the burial. He noted the location carefully. After the war, he guided Allied authorities to recover the bodies. The men now rest at Stavanger Eiganes churchyard. Their graves attended by locals who remember the sacrifice. Memorial ceremonies occur annually. The youngest volunteers are never forgotten. 41 men, every single one dead within 24 hours of reaching Norway. The most catastrophic special operations failure of the war to that point. But Operation Grouse remained in place. The 4 Norwegians survived winter on Hardangervidda, waiting. They ate reindeer meat when hunting was successful. When hunting failed, they ate lichen and moss, supplementing with dwindling British rations. November became December, became January. Temperatures dropped to -40 Celsius. Snow accumulated in meters-deep drifts. The men survived in dugouts, moving camp frequently. They maintained radio contact with London. Equipment repairs in sub-zero conditions tested ingenuity. Batteries froze regularly. Antennas snapped in wind. But Haugland kept communications functioning. His reports detailed German movements, weather conditions, and facility changes. He confirmed that heavy water production continued. He reported that German security remained high. The men waited. They knew Operation Freshman had failed. Radio intercepts and German activity indicated disaster. But they received no details, no orders to evacuate. They waited through the worst of winter. They survived because they were expert outdoorsmen. They knew how to find food in frozen wilderness. They understood cold weather survival. January became February. Then word came from London. A new operation was launching. Norwegian commandos were coming. Churchill refused to abandon the mission. German heavy water production continued. Each month meant more deuterium oxide for Nazi reactors. Intelligence suggested German nuclear program was advancing rapidly. A second attempt was ordered. But this time, everything would be different. No British troops, all Norwegian team, men who knew the terrain, who spoke the language fluently, who understood winter survival, who could blend into local population if necessary. Norwegian Independent Company 1, Company Linge, provided the personnel. Named for Captain Martin Linge, killed in a 1941 raid, the unit specialized in sabotage and resistance operations. Training was conducted in Scotland. Standards were ruthless. Colonel Leif Tronstad oversaw planning. Age 39, he was unusual for a military officer. Before the war, he'd been a chemistry professor and researcher. More importantly, he'd helped design the original Vemork heavy water production system. Tronstad knew every pipe, every valve, every vulnerability. He understood the production process intimately. He could identify critical points whose destruction would maximize damage. His knowledge was invaluable for mission planning. But Tronstad couldn't lead the field operation. He was too valuable for capture risk. If Germans took him alive and broke him under interrogation, Norway's entire resistance network could collapse. He would plan from London, not participate in Norway. Second Lieutenant Joachim Rønneberg received field command. 23 years old, born August 30, 1919, in Ålesund on Norway's western coast. Son of prominent family with century-long history in Norwegian politics. Rønneberg had been working for a fish export company when Germany invaded April 9, 1940. He was 20 years old. He watched German troops occupy his hometown. He refused to accept it. March 1941, he and 8 friends escaped aboard a fishing boat. They sailed from Norway to Scotland. The voyage was dangerous. German patrol boats, mines, storms. But they made it. Rønneberg reported to SOE's Norwegian section. He volunteered for commando training. The program was brutal. Weapons, explosives, silent killing, survival, resistance operations. He excelled in everything. SOE made him an instructor. He taught demolitions and sabotage. His calm demeanor and technical precision impressed superiors. SOE evaluation noted he possessed steadiness and inspiration in a high degree. When Tronstad needed someone to lead Operation Gunnerside, Rønneberg was the obvious choice. Young but mature beyond his years, expert in explosives, respected by peers. Rønneberg handpicked his team carefully. He needed men who could ski 400 kilometers to Sweden if necessary, who could survive weeks in wilderness, who could fight if cornered. Second Lieutenant Knut Haukelid, 31, was first choice. Experienced in resistance operations, he'd already conducted missions in Norway. He was tough, resourceful, and utterly committed. His wilderness skills were legendary. Sergeant Frederick Kaiser, 24, provided demolitions expertise. Young but highly skilled with explosives, Rønneberg trusted him to handle the shape charges. His steady hands and technical knowledge were essential. Second Lieutenant Casper Eideland, 24, brought communications expertise. He could maintain radio contact with London. He understood codes and procedures. His backup role was placing charges with the demolition team. Sergeant Hans Storhaug, 27, was renowned as an exceptional skier. His fitness was extraordinary. He could ski 100 kilometers without rest. He knew Hardangervidda terrain intimately. Sergeant Birger Strömsheim, 31, completed the team. Construction contractor before the war, he understood structural engineering. He could assess building weaknesses. He knew how to bring down structures efficiently. 6 men total, combined with Operation Grouse's 4, they'd have 10, but only 5 would enter the plant. The others would provide covering fire if needed. Training began in December 1942. The team relocated to Drumintoul Lodge in Scotland's Cairngorms Mountains. The environment resembled Hardangervidda, cold, mountainous, brutal. They trained in conditions matching what they'd face. SOE constructed a full-scale replica of Vemork's heavy water production room. Every pipe, every valve, every cell was positioned exactly as Tronstad described. The team rehearsed infiltration routes until they could navigate blindfolded. They memorized every detail. Tronstad briefed them exhaustively on target priorities. The high-concentration cells in the basement were critical. These cells produced 99.5% pure heavy water. Destroying them would halt production for months. 18 electrolysis cells stood in 2 rows. Each was a stainless steel cylinder about 2 meters tall. They were connected by pipes carrying water at various deuterium concentrations. The system was elegant and expensive. Shaped charges had to be placed precisely. Too much explosive would damage the building, alerting guards. Too little might fail to destroy the cells completely. The charges had to sever pipes and rupture cell walls without causing structural collapse. Kaiser calculated exact explosive quantities. 19 kilograms of plastic explosive total, distributed across critical points. British SOE provided specially manufactured shaped charges. Fuses were critical. They needed enough delay for the team to exit the building, but not so much that guards might discover and defuse them. 30-second delay was chosen. The team rehearsed placement until it became muscle memory. Runneberg could place all charges in under 5 minutes. Kaiser could do it in 4. Every second counted. But Tronstad couldn't tell them why this mattered so desperately. Nuclear fission was classified beyond top secret. The Manhattan Project was unknown even to most Allied leaders. The commandos couldn't be told what they were really stopping. "I cannot tell you why this mission is so important," Tronstad said at their final briefing. He distributed suicide capsules, potassium cyanide, fast-acting, death within seconds of swallowing. "But if you succeed," he continued, "it will live in Norway's memory for 100 years." The men understood the pill's purpose. Capture meant torture. Gestapo interrogation techniques were brutal and effective. Torture meant compromising the entire resistance network. If captured, they were to swallow the pills immediately. Death was preferable to betraying comrades. Every man accepted this without hesitation. Their lives mattered less than the mission. They wore British uniforms beneath Norwegian winter gear. This was deliberate. If captured in British uniform, Germans would blame SOE, not Norwegian resistance. Civilian reprisals in Rjukan would be minimized. The logic was cold but sound. Rjukan's 5,000 residents couldn't be exposed to German vengeance. If the raid appeared to be British operation, locals might be spared. The commando's nationality had to be ambiguous. February 16, 1943, 138, Squadron Halifax bomber departed RAF Tempsford. Pilot was squadron leader John Kjellstrup. No relation to Arne Kjellstrup of Operation Grouse. The coincidence of surnames was pure chance. The Halifax climbed to 10,000 feet. Inside, 6 gunnerside commandos checked equipment. Each carried a Sten gun, pistol, grenades, knife. Explosives were distributed among the team. The flight across the North Sea took 3 hours. Navigation was by dead reckoning. Compass, airspeed, time. Radio silence was maintained. German radar might detect them, but wouldn't know their purpose. They crossed Norwegian coast near Stavanger. Weather conditions were acceptable, clear skies, good visibility. The pilot navigated by landmarks, mountains, fjords, distinctive terrain features. But as they approached the drop zone, a blizzard moved in. Visibility dropped rapidly. The pilot couldn't identify the exact landing zone. He released the commandos at best approximation. Runneberg's parachute deployed properly. He counted to 10, checking canopy, full inflation, no tears, controllable descent. But visibility was nearly zero in blowing snow. He landed hard in deep powder. The impact jarred him, but caused no injury. He immediately began searching for equipment containers. They'd been dropped with the team. Finding equipment in a blizzard was nearly impossible. But Runneberg had trained for this. He used compass bearings and systematic search patterns. Within 30 minutes, he'd located 3 of 6 containers. One by one, team members appeared. Haukelid emerged from the storm. Kaiser followed. Eidland, Storhaug, Strömsheim, all accounted for. Miraculous luck. 6 men parachuting into darkness, blizzard, mountains. All landed safely, no injuries, but they were kilometers off target. They recovered remaining equipment containers over the next hour. Everything was there: explosives, weapons, rations, ski equipment. But the storm was intensifying. Moving was impossible. They spotted an abandoned hunting cabin. Built by local hunters, it offered shelter. The men broke in and took refuge. Outside, the blizzard raged. For 5 days they waited. The storm was one of the worst that winter. Wind speeds exceeded 100 kilometers per hour. Temperature dropped to -35 Celsius. Inside the cabin, they rationed food carefully. British rations supplemented with what they'd brought. They melted snow for water. They maintained weapons and equipment. The waiting was difficult. They were so close to their objective, but attempting to move in the storm meant death. Patience was essential. February 21st, the storm broke. Dawn revealed brilliant sunshine and pristine wilderness. The men emerged to assess their situation. Mountains surrounded them, snow-covered and beautiful. They were approximately 45 kilometers from where Operation Grouse waited. The distance wasn't extreme for experienced skiers. But they had to avoid German patrols. Navigation would be challenging. They began moving. Skiing with full packs through deep snow is exhausting. They made perhaps 20 kilometers the first day. Camp that night was in snow caves they dug. February 22nd, they continued. The terrain was brutal: steep slopes, dense forest, hidden crevasses. But they were expert mountaineers. They moved steadily southward. Afternoon of February 23rd, they made radio contact with Operation Grouse. Recognition signals confirmed identities. Coordinates were exchanged. The teams arranged rendezvous. That evening, 9 commandos met for the first time. Operation Grouse, now redesignated Swallow per SOE protocol, had spent 4 months in the wilderness. Poulsen, Haugland, Helberg and Kjelstrup looked gaunt, bearded, hardened. But their spirits were high and their intelligence gathering was complete. The combined team reviewed the mission. Swallow had observed German security exhaustively. They'd timed guard changes, mapped patrol routes, identified weaknesses. They'd even entered Rjukan town, gathering intelligence from sympathetic workers. The picture was daunting. German security had increased after Operation Freshman. More guards, more frequent patrols. The entire area around Vemork was on heightened alert. 3 possible approaches existed. First, Cross the suspension bridge. This was most direct but suicidal. The bridge was illuminated, guarded, and covered by machine guns. Second, descend through minefields from the mountain above, also suicidal. The minefields were extensive and unpredictable. Plus, this approach exposed them to searchlights sweeping upward from the plant. Third, descend 600 feet into the gorge, cross the half-frozen Mona River, climb 600 feet up the opposite cliff in darkness. The Germans considered the gorge approach impossible. Local Norwegians agreed. The cliff was near vertical in sections. Ice made footholds treacherous. One mistake meant a fatal fall. Therefore, it was the only viable option. Surprise depended on doing what the enemy thought impossible. If Germans believed the gorge was impassable, they wouldn't guard it. That was the infiltration route. The team spent February 24-26 finalizing plans. They studied recent intelligence from Swallow. They reviewed demolition procedures. They prepared mentally for what might be their last days alive. Rønneberg organized the assault precisely. 5 men would enter the plant: himself, Kaiser, Eidland, Strömsheim, and Frederick Kjellstrup from Swallow. Kjellstrup knew the area intimately, having grown up nearby. His local knowledge was invaluable. 4 men would provide covering fire: Haukelid, Hellberg, Storhaug, and Poulsen. They'd position themselves to engage German reinforcements if the assault team was discovered. They carried Stein guns, grenades, and determination to buy time for the demolition team if necessary. Ideally, no shots would be fired. Silent infiltration was preferable, but they were prepared to fight their way out if discovered. The covering team's sacrifice might allow the mission to succeed, even if they died. Every man understood this. Every man accepted it. The mission mattered more than individual survival. February 27, 1943, the 9 men departed their staging area after dark. They wore white camouflage over British uniforms. Each carried weapons, limited ammunition, explosives. They moved silently through snow-covered forest. The approach took hours. They had to avoid roads where German patrols operated. They navigated by compass and memory of terrain. Moonlight provided minimal illumination. They reached the gorge rim near 11:00 p.m. Below, the Mona River was partially visible through darkness. Ice covered much of the surface, but they could hear water flowing beneath. The descent began with Hellberg leading. He was the most experienced mountaineer. He tested each handhold, each foothold. The others followed in single file. The gorge wall was steep, but not quite vertical. Trees and bushes provided handholds, but everything was covered in ice. Every step risked a slip. They descended slowly, methodically. Each man helped the man behind him. Equipment snagged on branches regularly, but they maintained noise discipline, barely a sound. 30 minutes to reach the river. The ice appeared solid, but made ominous cracking sounds under weight. Hellberg tested different routes across. He found a path where ice seemed thickest. They crossed quickly, minimizing time on uncertain ice. One by one, they reached the far bank. Now came the harder part, climbing up. The cliff on the far side was steeper than the descent. Fewer handholds, more ice. They had to haul themselves up using tree roots and rock outcroppings. It was exhausting work in heavy gear, but they made it. By 12:15 a.m., all 9 men stood on the cliff top. Vemork lay 200 meters ahead. The plant hummed with machinery, lights blazing. They moved into final assault positions. The covering team positioned themselves with clear fields of fire. If guards appeared, they'd engage to protect the assault team. But they hoped to remain undetected. The assault team approached the plant perimeter. A gate stood in the fence. Workers used it during shift changes. It should have been locked. It wasn't. Someone, A Norwegian worker, sympathetic to resistance perhaps, had left it unlocked. Or perhaps it was simply German negligence. Either way, it was an unexpected gift. They slipped through. Now they were inside the perimeter. Discovery would mean immediate firefight. They moved like ghosts. They found a cable duct on the building's exterior. Tronstad had mentioned it, an access point for electrical cables running to the basement. The duct was narrow, barely wide enough for a man, but it led directly to the heavy water production room. Runneberg entered first. He had to remove his pack and push it ahead. The duct was tight, shoulders scraped metal sides, but he squeezed through. Kaiser followed, carrying the explosives. Then Idland, then Strömsheim, then Kjellstrup. 5 men crawling through a narrow metal tube. Any noise would alert guards meters away. They emerged in the basement, the heavy water production room. 18 cells stood in neat rows, humming quietly. Pipes connected them in complex arrangements. A Norwegian night watchman sat at a desk. Johansen, his name was later recorded. He looked up, shocked at 5 white camouflaged commandos emerging from a cable duct. His mouth opened to shout. Runneberg raised a finger to his lips, the universal gesture for silence. Johansen saw the weapons, the determination, the British uniforms under white camouflage. He understood immediately. Resistance operation. He nodded slowly. He said nothing. He watched as the commandos moved past. Johansen was Norwegian, worked for the Germans under duress, and his silence was his resistance contribution. Kaiser unpacked shaped charges, 19 kilograms of plastic explosive distributed in precise charges. Each charge was carefully placed against critical points on the high-concentration cells, the cells that produced 99.5% pure heavy water. Idland strung detonation cord. He connected all charges to a single firing point. British-manufactured fuses provided exactly 30-second delay. 30 seconds to exit the building after ignition. Strömsheim and Kjellstrup stood guard. They watched doorways for approaching guards. They were ready to fight if discovered. But the night remained quiet. Runneberg did final checks. Every charge positioned correctly against the 18 cells. Fuses connected properly and tested. The team ready to evacuate on his signal. He lit the fuses. The cord began burning, sparking and hissing quietly. 30 seconds started counting down. The 5 men moved toward the cable duct, but the duct was too slow. They'd crawled through during infiltration when time wasn't critical, but 30 seconds wasn't enough to crawl back through. They needed another exit. A door led to stairs. Runneberg tried the handle. Locked. He considered shooting the lock, but that would alert guards. Strömsheim examined it. Simple lock, old building. He forced it with a pry bar, 30 seconds of noise, but no alternative. The door opened. They rushed upstairs. Ground floor, then exterior door, 20 seconds remaining. They exited into the night. Behind them, muffled explosions. Not loud enough to alert distant guards. The basement location contained the sound. Observers might think combustion equipment had backfired. It happened occasionally. The 5 men sprinted toward the gorge. The covering team was already moving. All 9 converged at the cliff edge. Below, the river beckoned. They descended rapidly. This time speed mattered more than stealth. They slid, jumped, scrambled down. Someone fell, caught by teammates, no injury. They crossed the river. Ice cracked but held. Cold water splashed over boots. No one cared. They were alive and moving. The climb up the far side was frantic. Adrenaline overcame exhaustion. They hauled each other up, using sheer determination. Behind them, lights at Vemork were becoming erratic. Alarms began sounding. Searchlights swept the perimeter. Guards rushed to defensive positions, but the saboteurs were already gone into darkness. The 9 Norwegians skied into the wilderness. They had perhaps 30 minutes before German pursuit organized. They skied hard, putting distance between themselves and Vemork. The moon illuminated their path. Behind them, chaos was erupting at Vemork. German engineers discovered the destruction. 500 kilograms of heavy water flowing down drains. All 18 electrolysis cells destroyed beyond immediate repair. The shaped charges had done their work perfectly. Cell walls were ruptured, pipes were severed. The entire high-concentration production system was ruined. German commanders couldn't believe what they were seeing. Security had been penetrated without a single guard noticing. The most secure facility in Norway had been sabotaged under their noses. Not one shot fired, not one saboteur captured. The Gestapo was called. SS investigators arrived. They questioned guards ruthlessly. How had infiltrators penetrated security? The guards had no answers. They'd seen nothing. The perimeter was intact. The minefields were undisturbed. Then someone discovered the unlocked gate, and the forced basement door, and the cable duct. The infiltration route became clear, but by then, the saboteurs were kilometers away. German response teams assembled. 3,000 troops were eventually deployed to hunt the commandos, but they were searching wilderness for men who knew every meter of terrain. February 28th, dawn. The 9 Norwegians had skied 30 kilometers. They were exhausted but alive. They gathered at a predetermined location to assess. Now came the decision. 5 would continue to neutral Sweden, 400 kilometers of skiing through occupied territory. 4 would remain in Norway, continuing resistance operations. This had been planned before the mission. Rønneberg, Kaiser, Edlund, Strömsheim and Kjellstrup would attempt the Swedish escape. They'd report mission success to SOE. They wore British uniforms, so if captured, they'd be treated as POWs, theoretically. The suicide pills remained in their pockets just in case. Haukelid, Helberg, Poulsen and Haugland would remain. They'd remove their British uniforms and melt into the Norwegian population. Their local knowledge and connections made them invaluable for continued resistance. They'd continue sabotage operations until war's end. The teams separated, brief handshakes, no dramatic farewells. They were professionals who'd completed a mission together. The Swedish team skied southeast. 400 kilometers lay between them and safety. They traveled by night, hid by day. German patrols were everywhere. The route took them through occupied towns, past military installations, across heavily patrolled areas. They posed as workers when necessary. They avoided contact when possible. Their British uniforms stayed hidden beneath civilian clothes acquired along the route. March 18th, 19 days after leaving Vemork, they reached Swedish border. All 5 crossed successfully. Swedish authorities interned them briefly. Neutrality required this. But they were quickly released to Norwegian exile government representatives. From Sweden, they flew to Britain. In London, they debriefed SOE thoroughly. Every detail of planning, execution, and escape was documented. Their report became a textbook for special operations. The 4 who remained in Norway had harder paths. They lived in constant danger. Gestapo hunted them relentlessly, but they were ghosts in their own country. Haukelid continued operations through war's end. He would later lead the operation that sank the ferry carrying Germany's remaining heavy water. His courage was extraordinary. His wartime service earned him a place in Norwegian legend. Helberg escaped multiple close encounters with death. Once, Germans chased him for hours on skis. He skied them into exhaustion, then disappeared. His wilderness skills saved his life repeatedly. Poulsen and Haugland maintained resistance networks. They coordinated with SOE. They gathered intelligence. They prepared for eventual liberation. All four survived the war. Their contributions to Norwegian resistance were immeasurable. They'd not only executed the most successful sabotage operation of the war, they'd continued fighting until final victory. In Germany, the reaction to Vemork's destruction was fury mixed with disbelief. How had Norwegian commandos penetrated supposedly impregnable security? How had they known exactly which equipment to destroy? How had they escaped without a single casualty? Wehrmacht launched the massive manhunt. 3,000 troops deployed to Telemark. They combed Hardangervidda for weeks. Helicopters weren't available, so they searched on skis and foot. They found nothing. The commandos had vanished. The only evidence was destroyed equipment and the reputation of German security in ruins. Hitler was reportedly enraged at the intelligence failure. Vemork's damage assessment took days to complete. The news was devastating for German nuclear program. Production capacity eliminated completely. Repairs would require months, perhaps 6 months minimum. The 18 high-concentration cells were total losses. Replacement cells had to be manufactured. Installation required skilled technicians. The entire system had to be recalibrated from scratch. Germany's heavy water supply was effectively cut. Heisenberg's reactor experiments would have to pause. The German nuclear program lost critical momentum. The race for atomic weapons tilted further toward the Allies. But German determination remained strong. They immediately began repairs. Additional security was implemented. By May 1943, production was resuming. Allied intelligence tracked the repairs. Churchill received regular updates. The consensus was clear. Vemork had to be hit again. But ground operations were now nearly impossible given enhanced security. The decision was made to bomb. American 8th Air Force would conduct the raid. B-17 flying fortresses had the range and payload. The raid was scheduled for November 1943. November 16, 1943. 160 American B-17s departed England. Their target was the Vemork plant. Each bomber carried 14 500-pound bombs. The formation arrived over Rjukan in daylight. Weather was clear, excellent bombing conditions. The lead bombardiers identified the target. Bombs away. Over 700 500-pound bombs fell. The plant was severely damaged. The hydrogen factory adjacent to the heavy water facility was destroyed. The power station was hit multiple times. But the raid killed 22 Norwegian civilians. Most were women and children. They'd taken shelter in a bomb shelter that took a direct hit. The explosion killed everyone inside instantly. Norwegian government in exile in London was furious. They hadn't been consulted about the bombing. Civilian casualties were exactly what they'd wanted to avoid. The diplomatic crisis was severe. Prime Minister Johan Nygaardsvold protested formally to Allied command. Why weren't Norwegian authorities informed? Why was civilian population not evacuated first? The answers were unsatisfying: operational security, military necessity. But the damage to Vemork was extensive. German engineers assessed repairs would take months. Heavy water stocks were reduced, but not eliminated. Some production capability remained. German High Command made a decision. Vemork was too vulnerable. Production would be moved to Germany. Remaining heavy water stocks would be transported to German research facilities. This presented a new problem for Allies. If heavy water reached Germany, it could still enable nuclear research. The stocks had to be destroyed before leaving Norway. Another operation was required. Knut Haukelid received the order. Stop the heavy water shipment at any cost. Use any means necessary. Civilian casualties were authorized if unavoidable. The Germans planned transportation by rail. Railroad cars would carry heavy water in containers. The route included crossing Lake Tinge on the ferry DF Hydro. The ferry was the vulnerable point. Haukelid assembled a small team. Rolf Surley, age 27, would assist. Knut Lear Hansen, age 27, completed the team. 3 men to stop Germany's remaining heavy water supply. They studied the ferry's schedule and security. German guards accompanied the shipment, but the ferry carried regular passengers too, Norwegian civilians commuting across the lake. The moral weight was crushing. Sinking the ferry meant killing innocent Norwegians. Women, children, workers, people just trying to live under occupation. But allowing heavy water to reach Germany might mean atomic weapons. Haukelid made the decision. The ferry would be sunk. Civilian deaths were tragic but necessary. The stakes justified the action. February 19, 1944, night before the scheduled transport, the 3 saboteurs infiltrated Ryukyu harbor. The ferry DF Hydro sat at dock, unguarded. They boarded quietly, placed time-delayed charges in the bow, set detonation for mid-lake crossing the next morning. 17 pounds of plastic explosive with clock fuses. They set the timer for 10:45 a.m. By then, the ferry would be at the lake's deepest point. 460 meters of water would hide the wreckage. The heavy water would be irretrievable. They exited the ferry. No one had seen them. The charges were hidden perfectly. They disappeared into the night. February 20th, 1944. Sunday morning. DF Hydro departed Ryukyu on schedule. 53 passengers aboard, Norwegian civilians commuting, visiting family, conducting business. German guards accompanying the heavy water shipment. Railroad cars lashed to the deck. Inside the cars, containers holding Germany's remaining heavy water stocks. The ferry reached mid-lake, 10:45 a.m. The charges detonated. The explosion tore through the bow. Water rushed in catastrophically. The ferry sank in 4 minutes. Passengers scrambled for life preservers. Some reached lifeboats. Many didn't. 18 people died. 14 Norwegian civilians. 4 German soldiers. Their bodies were recovered over the following days. The railroad cars went down with the ferry. The heavy water containers sank to 460 meters depth. The contents were lost forever. Germany's heavy water program ended that morning in Lake Tinge. Haukelid carried the guilt for the rest of his life. He knew the civilians' names. He'd killed his own countrymen, but he never apologized. War demanded impossible choices. Inaction would have meant different deaths. Perhaps many more if Germany had achieved nuclear weapons. The calculation was cold, but necessary. Vemork's heavy water production was finished. The plant was eventually repaired, but never produced heavy water again. Germany never acquired sufficient deuterium oxide for nuclear reactor operation. Heisenberg's experiments remained theoretical. Post-war analysis revealed uncomfortable truths. Germany's nuclear program was further from atomic weapons than Allies had feared. Economic constraints made reactor construction nearly impossible. Scientific errors in calculations had led German physicists down wrong paths. Even with unlimited heavy water, they likely couldn't have achieved fission by war's end. Resource shortages, bombing of industrial infrastructure, loss of scientific personnel, all contributed to program failure. The Vemork operations may not have been strictly necessary, but this wasn't known in 1943. Allied intelligence assessed German nuclear capability as imminent threat. The fear was genuine. Einstein and other physicists believed Germany could achieve fission first. Stopping heavy water production seemed essential for survival. The risk justified the actions. The civilian deaths at Vemork and on DF Hydro were tragedies. But in context of total war against genocidal regime, the calculations seemed justified. difficult moral questions remain unanswered. Operation Gunnerside was recognized as SOE's greatest success. Every participant received decorations. Runeberg received Norway's War Cross with sword, the nation's highest military honor. Britain awarded him the Distinguished Service Order. France bestowed the Legion of Honor. The United States awarded the Medal of Freedom with silver palm. King Haakon VII personally commended the saboteurs. They became Norwegian national heroes. Statues were erected in Ålesund and Rjukan. Museums displayed their equipment. Films and television dramatized their mission. The 1965 film The Heroes of Telemark, starring Kirk Douglas, brought international attention. But Runeberg rarely discussed his wartime service. After liberation, he worked as a radio journalist for Norwegian Broadcasting Corporation. He lived quietly in Ålesund, his hometown. He married Liv Folldal in 1949, had children, lived normal life. Only in the 1970s did he begin speaking publicly about the operation. His message was always the same: war's horrors must not be forgotten. Young generations must understand what was sacrificed. Those who are growing today must understand we must always be ready to fight for peace and freedom, he said in countless lectures. Not glory, not heroism, just necessity and responsibility. He spoke at schools, military academies, international conferences, always emphasizing team effort, never individual heroism, always focusing on the cost of war, not its glory, always warning against complacency in peacetime. October 21, 2018. Joachim Runeberg died in Ålesund, aged 99. He was the last surviving Gunnerside saboteur. Norwegian Prime Minister Erna Solberg called him one of the country's greatest heroes. The BBC headline read, "The man who stopped Hitler's atomic bomb." The Washington Post, "Saboteur who crippled Nazi atomic program dies at 99. International media coverage was extensive. The world remembered what 9 Norwegians had achieved 75 years earlier. His funeral was attended by Norwegian royalty. Military honors were rendered. The nation mourned losing its last link to that extraordinary mission. But his legacy endures. The mission he led remains studied in military academies worldwide. Perfect planning, flawless execution, 0 friendly casualties during the operation, strategic objectives achieved completely. Special forces worldwide revere Operation Gunnerside. Navy SEALs study it. British SAS analyzes it. Israeli commandos model operations on it. The principles it demonstrated remain relevant. Detailed intelligence gathering over extended periods. Exhaustive rehearsal until execution becomes automatic. Exploiting enemy assumptions about what's impossible. Achieving surprise through audacity. But the deeper truth is more complex than headlines suggest. Germany's nuclear program faced insurmountable obstacles beyond heavy water scarcity. Hitler never fully committed necessary resources. German physicists made critical theoretical errors. Heisenberg's calculations contained mistakes that steered research away from viable bomb designs. Whether these were deliberate sabotage or honest errors remains debated. His post-war claims of intentional mistakes are viewed skeptically by historians. The truth may never be known. Resource shortages crippled German industrial capacity. Building nuclear reactors required massive electrical power, specialized equipment, and sustained effort. Allied bombing destroyed critical infrastructure. Germany's war economy prioritized conventional weapons. Even with unlimited heavy water, achieving fission by 1945 seems implausible. The Manhattan Project required unprecedented industrial mobilization. It cost $2 billion, equivalent to $30 billion today. Germany never approached such commitment. Yet Operation Gunnerside's success was real and measurable. 500 kilograms of heavy water destroyed in the initial raid. Production halted for months. German confidence in their nuclear program shaken fundamentally. Allied intelligence gained confirmation that sabotage was possible against seemingly impregnable targets. The mission validated SOE's strategic approach, small teams achieving disproportionate impact. It inspired resistance movements across occupied Europe. It proved tyranny was vulnerable. The mission demonstrated that Nazi Germany, despite its military might, could be struck at its industrial heart. That occupied peoples could resist effectively. That brave individuals could change history's course. These lessons transcended the immediate objective. The heavy water itself remains at Lake Tinnsjö's bottom. In 2004, Norwegian scientists conducted underwater surveys. They located wreckage of DF Hydro at 460 meters depth. Several heavy water containers were found. The deuterium oxide had long since dispersed into the lake. Natural water had contaminated it. The containers were empty. Germany's atomic dream rested in darkness and cold. The Vemork plant was demolished in 1977. Industrial preservation wasn't valued then. The building was torn down, equipment scrapped. Only photographs and memories remained. But in 1988, the Norwegian Industrial Workers' Museum opened at the site. Exhibits tell the heavy water story. The exact rooms where Gunnerside planted explosives are recreated. The cable duct through which they infiltrated is displayed. Runneberg's equipment is showcased. His skis, his pack, his winter gear. Photographs show the 9 men before their mission. Young faces, intense determination, uncertain futures. The museum attracts 30,000 visitors annually. School groups learn about resistance. Military historians study operational details. Descendants of saboteurs visit to honor relatives. Tour guides point to the gorge. They describe the 600-foot descent and climb. Visitors stare at the cliff, incredulous. It still looks impossible. The suspension bridge still exists, modernized now. Tourists walk across it. They look down at the Mana River far below. They imagine commandos crossing icy water in darkness. Memorial plaques honor the dead. Operation Freshman's 41 casualties. The 22 civilians killed in the bombing. The 18 who died on DF Hydro. Each memorial acknowledges sacrifice without glorifying war. The emphasis is on cost, not triumph. On tragedy, not victory. This reflects Norwegian values, remembering all who died. The mission's legacy extends beyond World War II. It influenced Cold War special operations doctrine. When Israel planned the Entebbe raid in 1976, planners studied Gunnerside. When American special forces developed tactics, they analyzed it. The operation demonstrated principles that remain valid. Small, highly trained teams can achieve strategic objectives. Surprise compensates for numerical inferiority. Detailed intelligence and exhaustive planning enable success. Audacity trumps conventional military wisdom. Modern special operations forces internalize these lessons. Operation Neptune Spear, the raid that killed Osama bin Laden, reflected Gunnerside principles. Small team, detailed planning, perfect execution, strategic impact. The parallels are deliberate, but Gunnerside also raises uncomfortable questions. When are civilian casualties acceptable? Who decides when ends justify means? How do we judge wartime decisions decades later with complete information? The bombing that killed 22 Norwegians saved perhaps 0 Allied lives. Germany wasn't close to atomic weapons. Was the bombing justified? Norwegian authorities said no, they weren't consulted, wouldn't have approved. The ferry sinking killed 18 people. 14 were innocent Norwegians. Was this justified? Haukelid said yes, always, but carried guilt forever. These questions have no satisfying answers. War creates impossible situations. Decisions must be made with incomplete information. Judging them from peacetime safety feels presumptuous. The saboteurs did what they believed necessary. They risked their lives for their country's freedom. They killed when they thought it essential. They lived with consequences for decades. Runneberg rarely discussed the DF Hydro sinking. It wasn't his operation, he was in Britain by then. But he understood Haukelid's burden. "War demands terrible choices," he said once. "We can only pray we never face them again." The ski route Gunnerside used escaping to Sweden is marked now. Adventure tourists follow the 400-kilometer path from Ryukan to Swedish border. It's called Runneberg's March, or Freedom Route. Completing it takes 3 weeks for experienced skiers. The route crosses Hardangervidda's most brutal terrain. Open plateaus where wind creates whiteout conditions. Steep valleys requiring careful navigation. Remote wilderness where help is days away. Hundreds attempt it annually. Most succeed. A few require rescue. It's considered one of Norway's most challenging ski expeditions. Those who complete it understand what the saboteurs achieved. 400 kilometers while being hunted. In 19 days, carrying weapons and supplies with no support infrastructure. The accomplishment seems superhuman. But it was simply expert outdoorsmanship combined with determination. And the knowledge that capture meant torture and execution. Fear is a powerful motivator. The cable duct at Vemork Museum is sealed now. Too many tourists tried crawling through. Safety regulations prevent access. But photographs show the impossibly tight space. That 5 men squeezed through carrying explosives seems incredible. That they did it silently, while guards patrolled nearby, seems miraculous. That they placed shaped charges with perfect precision in minutes seems impossible. But documentation proves every detail. The operation succeeded because nothing was left to chance. Tronstad's facility knowledge was complete. British SOE provided perfect equipment. Norwegian resistance supplied crucial intelligence. Training was exhaustive, months preparing for one night. Equipment was tested repeatedly. Contingencies were planned for every possibility, nothing was improvised, and 9 men executed flawlessly under impossible pressure. That's why the mission succeeded. Not luck, preparation and professionalism. Operation Gunnerside remains the gold standard for special operations. 75 years later, it's still studied, analyzed, emulated. The principles it demonstrated, intelligence, planning, training, execution, are timeless. Military academies worldwide teach it. But perhaps the most important legacy isn't military. It's the demonstration that ordinary people can achieve extraordinary things. Runneberg was a fish exporter before the war. Haukelid was a construction worker. None were professional soldiers initially. They were citizens who refused to accept occupation. They volunteered, trained, fought. They became heroes through choice and effort. That's the message that endures. Freedom isn't free, but it's worth fighting for. Tyranny seems overwhelming, but it's vulnerable. Individuals can change history's course through courage and commitment. February 27-28, 1943. 9 men descended a gorge thought impassable. Infiltrated a facility thought impregnable. Destroyed production thought irreplaceable. Escaped pursuit thought inescapable. They stopped Hitler's atomic dream through planning, training, courage, execution, through doing what everyone thought impossible, through refusing to accept defeat. That's why their mission endures in memory. That's why Runneberg's death at 99 made international news. That's why tourists visit a demolished plant in Norwegian mountains. Because what those 9 men did proves something essential about human courage. The heavy water is gone, the plant is demolished, the saboteurs are dead. But their example lives, in every person who refuses to surrender to evil, in everyone who stands against oppression, in all who believe determined individuals can change the world. Operation Gunnerside proved it on a frozen February night. The mission stopped Hitler's atomic dream. The example inspires resistance forever, 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 resistance forever.